I also want to point out, people, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it, the number of deaths from opioids in some cities, and even Vancouver, is sometimes surpassing a death from COVID. So these other crises aren't going away. But I want to get another perspective as calls echo across the country to defund the police. What do police officers on the ground think the best route is to law enforcement reform? What do they think is necessary? Danny Smyth is the chief of police for the Winnipeg Police Service. He joins us from Winnipeg. And Chief Smyth, first of all, good to have you here. And I always thank you for your service and your team's service to our communities. Is there systemic racism in your police force? Is there systemic racism in the RCMP?
Well, I can't speak for the RCMP, but if you're asking if we have systemic racism in our organization, I'd have to say yes. I mean, I'm part of a justice system here in Manitoba that has a prison population that's probably 60 or 70% Indigenous. I'm in a province that has over 10,000 kids in care, that over 80% of them are Indigenous. So something's not right. We're part of that system. We need to own part of that as well.
What did you make when the RCMP commissioner said there's only unconscious bias, there's no systemic racism?
Well, I would agree that everyone has implicit bias. I can't speak for Commissioner Lucky. I don't know her well. I'm sure she wishes she had a do-over.
Well, she had 3 opportunities in 3 different major networks, and I think that was her do-over. Some watchdog groups are calling out your organization for an inquiry into deaths of 3 Indigenous people in 3 days in Winnipeg. One of them was a 16-year-old, as you know. Do you support an inquiry into these deaths?
Well, I think one step at a time. Right now, those investigations are being conducted by our independent investigations unit. I'll see what they discovered during their investigation. In the province, when there's a death involved, it's not unusual to have an inquest afterwards anyway. So I think those answers and those truths will come out.
Yeah, I think it was in 10 days. I should just correct. Yeah, 3 deaths in 10 days. Still very tragic. What do you make, Chief, of calls to, quote, defund police? I know there's a lot of confusion about what that means. Fundamentally, a lot of folks regard that as meaning reallocating funds from a police budget to other things like social programs, homelessness, addiction, housing, so police don't have to deal with those on the front lines. Do you believe in the defunding police movement?
Well, I've always been open to those conversations, and I think, to your point, depending on who you're talking to, it means different things. I know the organizers of the protests here in Winnipeg, for them, that means abolition. That was the demand that they had. But, we see it range from reform to some of the funding being diverted to social services. I don't think those aren't mutually exclusive things. I think we need funding in both of those areas. So I don't see it as an either or. Our environment here in Winnipeg is such that many of the social services we partner with because we have some unsafe conditions. So I think for the immediate future, I see the opportunity for us to have more meaningful partnerships to address some of this work. Then I think there's plenty of time for conversations for us to withdraw or draw down our resources afterwards once we have a little more stability here.
Yeah, it's interesting because you can't have, I guess there could be funding for all. For most municipalities, the police budget is probably their biggest expense. So so drawing it down, and we just talked to the mayor of Vancouver, is very difficult. So, you're going to have to make some tough choices. If someone came to you and said, we're going to reduce your budget by 5 or 10% and allocate those resources to frontline issues like addiction or homelessness or mental health issues, what would your position be?
Well, there's a distinction here between what the municipality does and the province does too. So addictions and some of these other family services, they're more the jurisdiction of the province than the municipality, although there needs to be some coordination with that. If there was a determination that they were going to literally strip 10 or 15% of the police budget, we'd be looking at a pretty drastic cut in service here. So those kind of partnerships that I talk about, they wouldn't be readily available because we would literally be laying people off or withdrawing people from the organization. So it'd be pretty complicated to do it quickly. I think it's something that needs to be looked at in a more measured way.
Chief Smyth, your perspective's very much welcome in this critical discussion. Thanks for taking the time out, and thanks again for your service. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, Evan.